Ethan ran down the platform with burning lungs and a broken breath, as if every passing second weighed a ton on his legs. In his right hand, he carried a small, dark wooden box, no name, no markings, only an old rusted lock that looked untouched for decades. He had promised to deliver it that night, specifically on the 11:10 p.m. train, to a person seated in 47B. He wasn't allowed to ask, he wasn't allowed to open it, only deliver. It was his grandfather's final request before death. The digital clock above the platform read 11:09 p.m. when Ethan climbed the stairs two at a time. The sound of the arriving train was already there, a growl of metal and engines, a warning that it would not wait for anyone. Ethan pushed harder, nearly slipping, eyes locked on the doors still open. He reached out, breathless, as if sheer will could stop time itself. But just before he could touch it, the doors slammed shut, cold, final. The train began to roll forward, departing like a stolen destiny he could no longer claim. Ethan froze, clutching the box tight against his chest as the lights of the train grew smaller, farther, until vanishing completely into the darkness of the tunnel. The platform was empty, the air still. The clock shifted to 11:10 p.m. without mercy. 60 seconds later, 11:11 p.m. And in that minute, the world cracked in two. One life would continue here. Ethan stranded on the platform, box still in hand. The other, the one never lived, would have begun had he arrived just 1 minute sooner. He didn't know it yet, but that misplaced minute had condemned him to discover something no human was ever meant to see. Ethan walked home with slow, weighted steps, as if each one carried the burden of a broken promise. The box felt heavier than before, not in mass, but in meaning, as though the wood had absorbed the silence of the station. When he arrived, he set it on the table and stared at it for a long time without blinking, with the expression of someone watching a sleeping wild animal. There was something unsettling about its stillness, as if the object held movement trapped inside it, a pulse held back. He tried not to think, but his mind returned again and again to seat 47B, to the departing train, to the opportunity that slipped away. Hours later, while the city slept beneath pale streetlights, Ethan woke to a faint sound. It was barely audible, a tiny murmur, like a sigh contained within a locked chest. He approached without turning on the lights, guided only by the moonlight spilling through the window. The box was still there, unchanged, except for something small, almost invisible. The lock was trembling. It wasn't an illusion. It moved. A slow, persistent vibration, like something alive breathing beneath the wood. Ethan felt the hair rise on his arms. He lifted the box and noticed it was warm. Too warm to be just wood. It didn't smell like dust or old air. It smelled like electricity, like a storm waiting to break. He tried turning the lock, but it held tight, sealed, stubborn, as if refusing to be opened. He placed the box back on the table and stepped away, unable to look away. He didn't know if it was fear or fascination that pinned him there, but he understood one thing clearly. This box was no longer an object. It was a message, and he had failed to deliver it. At 03:10 a.m., exactly 4 hours after the train, the box emitted a sharp knock that shattered the night's silence. Ethan jolted upright. The lock clicked open on its own, a clean metallic snap, like a verdict being read aloud. The lid did not lift, but it was no longer sealed. It was as if the box had decided itself that the waiting was over. Something inside wanted to be released, or found. Ethan inhaled deeply. He knew this moment wasn't coincidence. He had been chosen, or pushed, toward something beyond his understanding. Without moving anything but his eyes, he watched the unlocked box, silent and still, like a heart before the first beat. The world seemed to hold its breath, as if life itself had paused to hear his decision. To open it would mean betraying the promise. To leave it closed would mean living forever in ignorance. His grandfather had asked for obedience, but fate, or something older than fate, now pointed him down another path. And for the first time since missing the train, Ethan understood something terrifying. Not delivering the box didn't stop the story. Missing the train woke it up. Ethan stepped toward the box slowly, as if it might react to his presence. There was no music, no wind, no distant traffic. The silence was so complete he could hear his pulse pounding inside his ears. He lifted the lid with the tips of his fingers, expecting something to leap out. Nothing did. Inside lay a single object, small, delicate, impossible to ignore. An old silver pocket watch, engraved like spiraling roots. Its hands pointed to one fixed time, 11:10 p.m. Not a minute more, not a minute less. As if time itself had stopped the moment he missed the train. He picked it up carefully. The moment the metal touched his skin, a soft heat rushed up his arm, climbing to his neck like a faint electrical current. It didn't hurt, but it was far from natural. Ethan wanted to set it back down, to return it to the box, but something inside him, an ancient curiosity, refused to let him. The watch was heavier than it looked, as though it obeyed a different gravity. The engravings shimmered under the dim light, shifting almost imperceptibly, like something breathing. That should have been impossible. Yet it was happening. He gritted his teeth and tried to open the watch lid. At first it wouldn't budge. But after a heartbeat, almost as if the watch heard him, the latch clicked softly. Inside, there were no numbers, no moving hands. Only a black sphere, deep, endless, like the mouth of a well. It swallowed light rather than reflected it. Looking into it made his stomach drop, like his consciousness could fall in and never climb back out. His mouth went dry. He couldn't look away. Without realizing it, his fingers turned the crown on the side. One small movement. A tiny gesture. The result was catastrophic. The air vibrated like glass about to shatter. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The distant roar of cars outside vanished. When Ethan looked up from his table, the world was frozen. A bead of coffee hung suspended mid-air beneath a mug, unmoving, perfect, like a photograph. The moment before sound died had become eternity. Ethan took one hesitant step, then another. Everything remained still. His breathing was the only sound left in existence. The watch burned warmly in his hand, forever stuck at 11:10, as if that hour was the border between time that moves and time that dies. And then he understood, with terror so clear it felt like a blade. Missing the train hadn't spared him. It had chosen him. By failing to deliver the box, he had inherited it. He was now the only person who could walk inside a world without seconds. Ethan moved through the suspended world with trembling steps, touching the air as if it might shatter beneath his fingers. The frozen drop of coffee glimmered like a tiny planet trapped in orbit. He tried to nudge it, and his fingertip met resistance, as though frozen time were a thick, glass-like substance, dense and almost fluid. He could push it, reshape it, but once released, the drop remained exactly where he left it, imprisoned in a perpetual second. Everything he touched could be altered, but nothing resumed motion. It was a universe built of endless pause. Outside, the streets were an enormous sculpture. People frozen mid-conversation, a dog suspended with its nose inches above the ground, a traffic light caught between red and green, unable to choose which future to obey. Ethan walked among them with his heart pounding fiercely, aware that every step made him the only moving life in a world without breath. No wind, no insects, no laughter, only him, the last ticking pulse inside a place where time had gone deaf. He tested what would happen if he touched someone. A man stood still on the sidewalk, eyes half blinking, life paused beneath the skin. Ethan pressed a hand to his shoulder, gently pushing. The man didn't sway naturally, didn't stumble. He shifted millimeter by millimeter, as though molded from invisible clay. A shiver ran through Ethan. It felt like trespassing against something sacred. What if the change remained forever? What if breaking the stillness rewrote someone's fate without their consent? He backed away quickly, clutching the watch, realizing the truth like a blade at his spine. He wasn't just observing the frozen world. He was able to change it, and that meant responsibility. He returned home desperate for answers, searching shelves, drawers, memories, but there were no instructions, no warnings, no manual for someone who carried time. Only the watch, pulsing like a borrowed heart in his palm. Why had his grandfather asked him to deliver it? For what purpose? To whom did it truly belong? If the watch was never meant for him, then why did it respond only to his hand? Every question was a labyrinth, every missing answer a locked door. In exhaustion, Ethan finally twisted the crown backward, a frantic attempt to return time to its rails. With a shudder, the world exhaled. The refrigerator hummed again. The suspended coffee drop fell. A distant dog barked. Time came roaring back to life. Ethan gripped the table, breathless. He had tasted the power of the watch, seen a world without seconds, and felt the monstrous weight of holding such a gift. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that missing the train by 60 seconds hadn't cost him an opportunity. It had handed him a fate. In the days that followed, Ethan lived split between two impulses: to hide the watch like a silent curse, or to use it like a forbidden miracle. At first, he tried to ignore it, kept it locked inside the box, hoping the world would move forward without his intervention. But the watch refused to be forgotten. Sometimes it vibrated without sound. Other times it glowed faintly beneath the wood, as if reminding him that time could be molded with a simple turn. He slept little, ate even less. Curiosity grew inside him like a knot pulled tight in his stomach. The first time he used the watch on purpose was almost accidental. From his window, he saw a child trip on the sidewalk just as a car approached too fast. The watch burned in his pocket before Ethan even consciously chose to act. His fingers moved on their own, twisting the crown forward, and the world froze again. He rushed down the stairs, feeling like an intruder inside a motionless painting. He moved the child back onto the curb, away from the car's path, feeling as if he were touching destiny with bare hands. When he returned time to normal, the child fell harmlessly to the ground, unaware of the danger that never reached him. The mother lifted him, confused as to why the car had stopped meters away. No one saw Ethan. No one knew what he'd done. But he knew. That night, he slept with an unsettling truth pulsing in his mind. He could save lives. And if he could divert tragedy with a single second, wasn't it his duty to do so? What if he had been chosen for this, precisely because he missed the train? With every rescue, Ethan grew more skilled at moving through frozen time. He shifted objects, pulled knives away from kitchen edges, snuffed out candles left burning by windows. No one ever saw him. People simply woke up into a world slightly corrected. But the responsibility began to weigh on him. Each time the watch was used, it left subtle marks inside his memory, as if time demanded a different kind of payment. Sometimes he forgot words. Sometimes he couldn't recall the face of someone he'd saved. It was as though his identity was being sanded away, slowly, invisibly. Then one dawn, exhausted after preventing 3 possible tragedies, Ethan looked into the mirror and felt his blood run cold. His eyes were no longer the same color. One was still brown. The other had turned a metallic gray, identical to the watch's reflection. Time was taking something from him, or shaping him into something else. And then he finally understood the real message hidden in that missed train. That minute didn't just alter his world. It chose him to carry the weight of seconds no one else could see. But this was not the only life that existed for Ethan. The same 60 seconds that made him miss the train were enough to create another reality. One where he did arrive on time, where the doors never closed, where the watch never vibrated inside a box forgotten on the table. In that other path, his hand touched the metal just before the train pulled away, and his body stepped inside while destiny still hadn't decided who should carry the weight of time. There, Ethan didn't return home with the box. There, he fulfilled the promise his grandfather left with his final breath. And what he found in seat 47B didn't grant him power. It granted him a truth that would change his life forever. Now, we witness that version, that branch of fate, the one born when he makes it onto the train. In this version of fate, Ethan reached the platform with 1 minute to spare. The train still hadn't closed its doors, the air was warm and crowded with sound, and the box in his hands didn't weigh like a secret, but like a purpose. He stepped inside effortlessly, breathing with the relief of someone escaping a darkness he would never have to know. He walked through the cars with his eyes fixed on seat 47B, ignoring the rest of the world around him. That was where the other life awaited, the consequence of arriving on time, though he couldn't possibly imagine it. Seat 47B was occupied by an older woman, white-haired, ash-pale eyes, still as stone. She didn't look at him, but she seemed aware of him, as if she had known he would arrive all along. Ethan sat beside her, holding the box tightly with both hands, uncertain where to begin. No introduction was needed. The woman extended her hand, calmly, naturally, as though the world itself had been waiting for that gesture for years. Ethan placed the box in her palm. For the first time since his grandfather's death, he felt he was fulfilling something that did not belong to him, yet was entrusted to him. She opened the lock effortlessly, as if it had been created solely for her to command. Inside was the same silver pocket watch, but in this timeline it did not glow red nor tremble. It was asleep, silent. It also read 11:10 p.m., yet held no violent pull, no hungry gravity. She cupped it gently, like a memory once lost. Her lips quivered, not with fear, but relief, as if something old had finally returned to its rightful place. Her voice came soft, heavy with years and farewells. She explained that Ethan's grandfather had not been an ordinary man. He belonged to an ancient circle, not to wield time, but to guard it. The watch was not power, but a key, not a weapon, a legacy meant to be passed, never kept. In this reality, Ethan was only a messenger, destined to deliver what he was never meant to carry. His life would continue quietly, untouched by frozen seconds. He would never know what the watch could do, and because of that, he would never be consumed by it. Ethan watched as she closed the box with a grateful breath, as though returning an ancient heart to its rightful chest. The train moved softly, without tension, without hidden disaster. It was an ordinary night, simple and yet decisive. He did not receive power. He never felt the world stop. He never touched the weight of suspended time. He only fulfilled a promise. And that obedience saved him from a destiny that, in another line, would have swallowed him whole. Here, Ethan simply lived. Ethan stepped off the train without feeling that anything extraordinary had happened. The city looked the same. The advertisements glowed on the same corners, and the night had no invisible cracks like the other timeline. He walked home with the warm sensation of having fulfilled a task he didn't fully understand, but which no longer belonged to him. There was no watch burning in his pocket, no seconds frozen in the air. He was simply a man returning to his normal life, unaware that he had escaped a fate that would have swallowed him from within. The days passed with an almost suspicious softness. Ethan worked, talked with friends, slept without nightmares, as if an invisible hand had cleared his path ahead. There were no vibrations at dawn, no boxes opening on their own, no eyes changing color in the mirror. He lived like someone who had never stood 1 minute from an abyss. Sometimes he remembered the train and the woman in seat 47B, but those memories blurred like a dream one chooses not to chase. Strangely, he never felt curiosity about what was inside the box. One ordinary afternoon, Ethan found an old photograph tucked inside a book that once belonged to his grandfather. In the photo, a group of people posed with watches identical to the one he had delivered. Their expressions were calm, yet solemn, as if they carried secrets the rest of the world could never bear. Ethan stared at the picture for a long time, feeling a slight shiver, a doubt like a needle beneath the heart. Something inside him knew the watch held a purpose far greater than its delivery. But he didn't remember more. He didn't dig deeper. The seasons changed with gentle slowness. Ethan fell in love, traveled, learned to cook better than before. He had happy moments, small mistakes, quiet victories, a life built in peace, untouched by suspended time. No child was saved by his hand in this timeline. No accident was quietly prevented. Ethan lived a simple life, never becoming a hero. Sometimes before sleeping, he would think about the feeling of that train pulling forward, about the old woman who looked at him without ever really looking. There was something mysterious there, something he would never fully understand. But he would close his eyes, breathe deeply, and the doubt would fade like dust. Because in this timeline, the one where he arrived a minute earlier, Ethan did not carry the weight of time or the shadow of a broken destiny. He was only human. And maybe, in silence, the world was grateful that he was. Ethan lived unaware that every morning he woke was a perfect detour from disaster. While he brewed coffee or waited for the bus, in the other line his reflection wandered through dead seconds, losing memories like leaves torn away by the wind. But here, in this life without frozen clocks, the world moved forward without demanding blood in exchange. He never knew his peace was the price of having surrendered power. He never imagined that somewhere, in fractured possibilities, another Ethan walked alone through eternal silence. One night after work, he heard sirens in the distance. A building had suffered a small fire. Nothing fatal, just a scare. The crowd watched as firefighters gained control, and for a fleeting second, Ethan felt an inexplicable emptiness in his chest. As if some intuition told him he could have done more, something impossible, if he held in his hands something he no longer remembered. But the feeling vanished quickly, swallowed by normality. No one expected him to intervene. He didn't know how. In the days that followed, small coincidences began to unsettle him. An elderly man stumbled but didn't fall. A bicycle nearly hit him but turned a centimeter before touching him. A traffic light always shifted just as he arrived. Tiny gestures of fate, invisible threads smoothing the road ahead of his steps. Not miracles, not interventions, just seconds arranging themselves without needing to freeze. A world continuing naturally without asking him to carry its structure. Ethan never wondered what would happen if time could stop. He never knew the pocket watch beyond the brief contact of delivering it. He never felt the weight of an unmoving universe, nor the absolute silence of a frozen world. And so he lived without fear, because the most terrible knowledge never touched his mind. Ironically, ignorance was his salvation. 1 minute early gave him life, not burden. Days, not destiny. Humanity, not eternity. Yet some nights, he lay staring at the ceiling, unmoving, as if his soul remembered something his mind had forgotten. A shadow of déjà vu, an echo without origin, a sensation of double existence. As if, somewhere in time, he lived another way too. But Ethan never followed that thought. He turned over, exhaled, and slept. Because in this line, the one where he did reach the train, the past did not scream. It only whispered. One ordinary day, Ethan was walking downtown when something made him stop for no apparent reason. In the window of an antique shop, among old books and rusted compasses, rested a pocket watch identical to the one he had delivered on the train. Silver, spiral engraved, frozen at 11:10 p.m. His heart lurched, as if something ancient inside him suddenly awakened. He stepped closer to the glass, holding his breath, unable to look away. Was it the same one? Another? Had there always been more? He entered the store with a slight tremor in his hands, a cold electric shiver climbing his spine. The shopkeeper watched him approach as if he had been waiting for him for years. Ethan didn't ask for a price nor origin. He simply held the watch with worn hands and spoke a sentence that pierced Ethan's mind like a soft blade. Sometimes destiny doesn't need to be remembered in order to repeat itself. Ethan didn't answer. He only felt his legs move forward on their own, toward the object he was never meant to see again. He took the watch between his fingers, and for a moment he believed the entire shop dissolved around him. There was no sound, but no silence either. It was an invisible pause, as if the universe inhaled before speaking. Ethan closed his eyes, and a distant echo passed through his mind. A child who didn't die, a mirror reflecting a different color of eyes, a world suspended in unmoving seconds. Memories that weren't his, images from a life he never lived. But that existed somewhere in fractured time. He dropped the watch as if it burned. It struck the counter without breaking, but the shopkeeper smiled as though he had witnessed something inevitable. Ethan stepped back, one pace, then another, his heartbeat pounding like a door someone was just about to open. He didn't want to know more. He didn't want to touch another life that wasn't his. He left the shop gasping for air, feeling as though he had crossed a thin, invisible thread between realities. A thread so fragile it could snap with a single additional thought. From that day on, Ethan avoided that street, avoided watches, avoided remembering. But destiny does not disappear just because it is ignored. Sometimes it waits in silence, watching, listening, holding its breath until the exact minute comes to knock again. Because a watch frozen at 11:10 p.m. is not a relic, it is a warning. Years passed, and Ethan grew old without the burden of frozen time, but also without the memory of what could have been. He lived a quiet life, full of ordinary days, dinners with friends, autumn rain, and dawns that demanded no answers. Sometimes he dreamed of doors closing just before he reached them, of trains departing with a metallic whisper lingering behind. But he always woke without anguish, only with a gentle question. What would have happened if he had arrived 1 minute late? He never found an answer, because that answer existed in another life he never knew. In his moments of silence, Ethan walked through the city and saw familiar faces he didn't remember, as if each person were a faint shadow of a destiny he didn't choose. There were children who smiled at him as though grateful, elders who looked at him with the recognition of something long forgotten. But no one spoke. No one wore old pocket watches. No one mentioned trains. The world moved forward, simple, clean. A world that didn't need invisible heroes repairing broken seconds. A world that breathed without the pressure of frozen time. One day, with hair streaked in gray, Ethan woke before sunrise and felt an inexplicable pull toward the station. Not out of nostalgia, something deeper, like a small part of his soul remembered a path his memory erased. He sat on the bench where, in another line of fate, he had once watched the train leave without him. But here, there was no rush, no burning watch. Just a man looking at empty tracks, peaceful as someone who never opened a forbidden box. The station lights flickered. The wind moved like a turning page. Ethan closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and for a second, just 1 second, he thought he heard the sound of a frozen world, a thick silence, a familiar echo of a power he never touched. And then, he thought, with immense calm, maybe destiny isn't a straight line. Maybe it's a map of paths we never see. He smiled, not with sadness, but with gratitude, for the life he lived, for the life he didn't carry, for the life that never consumed him. When he opened his eyes, the station clock read 11:10 p.m., even though it wasn't night, even though it wasn't the hour, even though it shouldn't have been. But Ethan didn't stand. He didn't run. He didn't search for boxes or motionless seconds. He simply watched as the world moved at its natural pace, asking nothing of him. Because there were two stories in the same man, two lives separated by 60 seconds. One where time was a devouring gift, another where time simply let him live. And so, without drama or tragedy, Ethan understood the quiet truth of destiny. Sometimes arriving on time is the deepest form of being free.